Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the July 2022 Council Agenda Briefing. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to turn off their mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening. I declare this meeting open at 6 p.m. Items for Council, agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held 26 July 2022. Item 4 is attendances. Item 4.1 is apologies, and we have received an apology from Councillor Ken Manolis this evening. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, of which there are nil this evening. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Councillors, does anyone have any declaration of interest that they wish to make tonight? And I'm not seeing any hands go up, so that's a no. Item 8 is presentations. And this evening we have 3 speakers who will have up to 10 minutes in total to address council. And with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Paul, I hope I'm going to pronounce your surname correctly, Kotsoglo? Oh, thank you. Of Perth, who is speaking against the officer's recommendation at 10.3.1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'm joined this evening by Kate Brooks from our office, and young lady has worked with me, done all the hard work, and I've asked her to join me if that's okay.
By all means.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, my name's Paul Kotsoglo. Kate Brooks joins me. We act for Sparkling Investments, the owners of the subject site, the corner of South Terrace and Canning Highway. You'll be familiar with this site, and I'm told that I can drive this with... Where do I point this? Okay. My presentation tonight's intended to discuss the proposed development, compliance with your planning framework, some site history, the amenity impacts, and we say that there are nil impacts on any residential amenity, the existing development, how we propose to operate the signage, and that the correct and the preferable decision is an approval. We're proposing a digital sign. We've got plans of that sign, as you've seen in your submissions. It's a curved digital sign. It's located between the roof and the awning of the site. So it's not a rooftop sign, but it covers an area that is currently what's effectively the back end of a building. And we say it will add value to the amenity of the building. It will improve the building. The sign will be visible to traffic, and it essentially points across the intersection to the Como Hotel. It's nearly 9 metres long by nearly 3 metres wide. It's curved and it has an area of 25, nearly 26 metres. The planning framework does allow the local authority to give us an approval for this sign. It allows the local authority to depart from the strict application of policy on the basis that Policy is intended to guide development decisions. And taking all factors into account, we say that the third-party signage, which I see the Policy 308, the South Perth City Council Policy 308, guides us to, it avoids third-party advertising. We say there's no material difference between third-party, first and second-party advertising on a digital sign. And these days, with digital signage, new technology, our rules haven't kept up. In fact, our client is proposing to offer opportunity for community messaging, as well as community artists, work to be put onto the signage. And that would be 2.5% of the signage that goes up on that and the messaging that goes up on that sign. And I say that with some fondness because my daughter several years ago won the City of South Perth Emerging Artists Award. And we would see that sort of opportunity being provided to display work of that nature, of your artists in your community. I look around the room, I remember this sign. I grew up in Kensington. Signage is not new to this site. This sign doesn't exist today, but it's not new to this site. And the point that I'm making is a sign that we propose to cover between the awning at the first floor level and the blue line, which is essentially where that sign will go, doesn't set a new precedent for this site. And it doesn't set a new precedent for the district because, of course, you've got Henley and Canning Highway that has a rather large sign, much more pronounced than this, on the site. We're proposing a sign that wraps around what's essentially the area of the building above the awning to the circular window to the right of that slide. Okay. There's already signage in the area. There's signage in the area, and these slides, I submit, demonstrate a couple of things. Immediately adjoining this site, on the face of the building and the face of the sign that we are presenting, presents to no residential development, which will have, this sign will have no material impact to any residential development that this faces. The reason for that is it's such a distance between the sign and the residential development. The nearest residential development that would have a line of sight would be in the bottom frame, and that's to the west side of the Como Hotel car park. As you can see there, it has the buildings, the residential dwellings there, have a big brick fence that really screens out the car parking light and the movements that you would get around midnight when people disperse from the hotel. On the southern side of South Terrace, obviously you won't see the sign because there's a large building in front of you, that green roof building with the atrium, but also the large tree. We say this has no material impact on the residential dwellings in the locality. Obviously, it doesn't have any impact to the properties to the rear, and this is what this sign will point to. You're all familiar with that, I expect. This is the development that's down the road at the corner of Henley and Canning Highway. This is much, much more pronounced than this development. This development already establishes a precedent for the area. We're not creating something of this scale, but we're not creating something new either. We are proposing to switch the sign off between 10 and 6, 10 p.m, 6 a.m, and we're fortunate, and in my experience, in the rare experience of dealing with main roads, to have no objection to the proposal, which is an achievement in itself. Got a bit carried away here. We say that this is consistent with orderly and proper planning. We say it's so because there's already been digital advertising approved in the area. It doesn't have an adverse impact on the amenity of the area. In fact, it has a positive impact. We say that there's not much difference, realistically, between first and second party advertising. That's advertising saying what's available in the premises, versus third party advertising, which goes broader than what's available in the premises. We say it's an opportunity to improve the amenity of this site. Remember, half of this site is reserved for primary regional road. There's no motivation for an owner to improve the development because it can be taken away at any time. But our client has undertaken,
60 seconds remaining.
thank you, Mr. Mayor, to improve the facades, improve the building, and on that basis, we respectfully request your support and an approval for this application. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr Kotsoglo. Councillors, do we have any questions this evening? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Kotsoglo, for your presentation. Before I ask a question, may I ask that? Oh, it's already up. So with regards to this drawing, which is a dimension drawing, I went and scaled the sign height with the 3400 millimetres height of the building. And when I do that, I get a sign height which is approximately 1530 millimetres, which is obviously not the 2880 millimetres on there. It looks as though it's 1.35 metres less than what it should be. And indeed, when I add the dimensions, the 3400, the 700, the 1350 and the 2880 millimetres, then that summation is 8330 millimetres, which is greater than the top of the building height of 7670 millimetres. So, which is above the building roof line, which is not being depicted here, nor what has been stated within the DA. So with that, am I misinterpreting your drawing in some way?
I'm going to go to the plan and try and read the drawing and make sure that I'm not misrepresenting what we're presenting. Well, the plans that I have, which have been presented, drafted in a normal way that we deal with them, show what you have up there. If you've measured it differently, I'm not sure how you've measured it. How do you suggest you measured it?
I mean, certainly. I mean, it's just a simple scaling drawing where you got 3400. You take a measurement. 1 millimetre equals a certain distance, and then you scale it with the height of the advertising. I mean, it's just simple relative scaling. And look, you know, I was surprised by that, and that's why I actually went and then summated all those dimensions, and that summation is higher than the 7670. So something's not adding up for me, and hence I'm seeking clarification.
Sure.
Ms Mullen, did you able to provide us with some guidance in the meantime?
Thank you, through the chair, if I may. Officers have assessed it based on the dimensions that have been provided, not the actual scale of this particular image, because this isn't intended as being to scale. It's intended as being an image that shows a representation of how it would appear. So officers have certainly looked at the scale. We've also been looking at the measurements of the existing illuminated signage on Canning Highway, so we can make a good comparison between the two. So we didn't take this as a scale drawing, in effect. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly, but there is a scale here because it has dimensions. But it is a drawing to reflect that advertising sign relative to where it is. And so scaling is valid here.
The photo montage that's presented is intended to show what it appears, what it's intended to appear as. The approach that the officers have taken by working with the dimensions on the plans that have been presented in the application would be the approach that I would take as well. So I don't have an answer for you, and we'll certainly find that out prior to the council meeting next week if that's able to be provided to the officers.
Councillors, Councillor Russell?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that on notice if that's what
you.
you're asking. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a follow-on question if I can. And again, I need to ask if page 89 of the attachments be put up. Thank you. So, okay, so this drawing shows you that the advertisement is sitting flush or sitting on top of the canopy. Yes. Whereas the next page, page 90, it seems to be proud of that. So it's been supported by a steel structure, and that now elevates the advertisement above the canopy. Well, I'm not sure what the term is, of the building. So again, there seems to be discrepancy between drawings, where one shows it proud and one shows it flush.
I haven't been on the roof, so I can't tell you. I expect that would sit flush with the, it would be visible from behind the awning. So the signage around an awning or a veranda, the signage that promotes the building, the tenancies in the building, often sits above the tin or the ceiling of that. So this may very well exceed the brick construction around the edge of the building, but it's behind the awning that hangs out over the footpath.
Okay, yeah,
This
okay.
won't have-
Maybe I used the wrong term in terms of awning. So the previous drawing showed it sitting atop the brickwork. Yeah. If you look at section
I don't know
AA.
that it says that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that it says that. It doesn't say it on that drawing that I can see. It says section AA,
So-
and it shows a line. I don't know.
Okay, would you like to take that on notice?
I'd be delighted to, thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. My final question then is, I've reviewed the road safety assessment, and I'm just wondering why South Terrace travelling east is not included in the casualty crash rate, particularly when there's a merged traffic condition immediately after the intersection.
The travelling from the east,
No, travelling from the west going east
you've
on
passed the
South
sign.
Terrace.
If you pass the sign,
Certainly, but when I look at, if we were to look at the assessment criteria for main roads WA, you've got to look at 1 kilometre before and half a kilometre afterwards, yeah, in terms of the casualty crash rate. So I'm just wondering why that same philosophy wasn't extended to South Terrace, and particularly when there's a merged traffic condition.
I don't know the answer to that. I'll need to get the traffic engineers to advise on that.
Again, would you be happy to take that on notice?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions this evening? Councillor Cridland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We do have another electronic sign on Canning Highway, which is the one you've referred to, down at Henley Street. Now, that one was approved by the Joint Development Assessment Panel rather than the council. and it was approved at a time that when we didn't have a policy in respect of signs. One of the significant factors for the Joint Development Assessment Panel, I know because I was sitting on it at the time, was that it was intended, because it was on a road reservation, that that building would be a temporary building. When the road is widened, the building would be demolished, and it allowed some sort of commercial use of the building in the period between now and then, and the developer gave an undertaking, an enforceable undertaking, that they would not seek compensation and would remove the building when that happened. Now, in this case, you're obviously not building a whole new building, otherwise you'd be at the JDAP. You're just putting a sign up. But is it a similar sort of situation where you're simply seeking to use a building that you expect is going to be demolished rather than refurbished? Is that your intention, or is it part of some greater development of the building?
No, the expectation is that the building will stay there for at least a few years, and the building would be, at some time in the future, we expect the widening to be taken. Having said that, that's a government decision. It may or may not happen. So our clients expect that this may be taken, and when it is, the arrangement, because the development would be the subject of a requirement from the main roads to the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage to widen that road. That if the widening was taken within the next 5 years, we would expect the building would be taken and you'd have to remove the sign. They can be moved and they can be placed elsewhere. But there's a return on investment that a developer requires and the signage organisation requires. Typically, they look for 10 years. That widening along Canning Highway has been in place for something over 20 years, as I understand it. And whether or not the government's going to take that widening and develop it for extra highways or bus lanes will be at, the government's discretion.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions for Mr Kotsoglo this evening? No. Thank you very much for your deputation. We appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, councillors.
So, I'd now like to invite Ms Tracy Distry of Manning, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 12.1. Welcome, Ms Distry.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, Mr CEO, administration. I commend Councillor Mary Choi on putting forward I think a timely but also responsive motion to start looking at the preservation of trees on development sites, but I think more broadly the preservation of trees across the city of South Perth. I don't come this evening to justify why we need more trees. I think the science is clear on that, and I'm more interested in achieving change and finding a mechanism to achieve that change. And that forms part of my presentation tonight in support of the officer recommendation. The motion itself speaks to policy P305.05, which I think is the preservation of trees on development sites and street verges. I'm afraid I don't have the date of when that was last reviewed, but I understand it is part of a package that was sent to the Audit and Risk Committee in March. The motion itself, I think, is fairly clear in what it is asking, and I understand the officer's response in saying that referring rather than 6 months, that this be tied into the review of the LSP7. I'm not sure exactly whether we support one over the other at this stage, I think at this point, but the issue I'd like to raise with the administration in particular and with council is the timing of that and the process that's actually followed in relation to that review. As we know, local planning strategies can take some time, although I understand we are in a time frame of that being released. What we wouldn't like to see is perhaps if it is rolled into the strategies review, that we find that this is going on for some time and perhaps into year, 18 months or whatever. The officer's recommendation refers to the administration's participation in urban strategy workshops with WOLGA and the subcommittee related to trees on development sites. I think that's a valuable thing. What I ask of you councillors is I think it is time for us to lead. It is one thing to be part of WOLGA and to see how the flow goes and see how the climate goes, no pun intended. However, you will see me repeatedly come back with this issue is what is the vision that this council has for tree preservation and tree canopy and climate change across the city of South Perth. We're not in a time where following actually gets results. It is a time to lead. If I move now to the actual specific policies themselves, because I think they are particularly relevant in the discussion you'll have at council, policy 2.5 relates to street preservation. It is brief. It was first established in November 2002 and has gone through an annual review which looks to be largely unchanged. There is reference there to significant trees, and as you would be aware, I've participated in that process and made a nomination for 3 significant trees in recent times. The policy states significant trees are determined by criteria set in the associated management practice. At the bottom of the policy, it states relevant management practice not applicable. I would seek some clarification as to whether there is a management practice for significant trees or not. We have requested more visibility, and we're thankful for being provided by the Director of Infrastructure Services. Is that up to date? For a copy, and we received the entire tree register, which was good, but I think the community deserves to be able to see this as well. And certainly other cities and local governments are publishing those things and the process on the website so that it is a bit more transparent, but I think also a bit more positively promoted. The policy goes quite specifically to tree preservation orders, and this is where I find for policy language it actually gets very firm. It says only the best, my emphasis, only the best quality trees rather than every tree of a certain description will be considered for the tree register. I understand the principle. I think the language could be benefited. I think also in relation to tree preservation, the other thing around the criteria is there is no transparency around those criteria, and we certainly appreciate to be able to understand what that is so we could help promote through the community the identification and nomination of significant trees. If I look at related policies, we have 204, street verges, 205, tree preservation, 206, urban forest, and the 305.05 trees on development sites and street verges. These recent policies went to the Audit and Risk Committee in March, where it was recommended one have a major change, another have a minor change, the other have no change at all. And that was deferred at the time and supported by council. It was deferred to June, and again, we see that the matter has been deferred to September. I'm not here to point out the reasons why work is not progressed in what is probably a timely matter, because the annual review is normally done in November, but what I am seeing is an opportunity to be consulted as a member of the community with concerns on these policies. The local government reforms, well, I don't need to point out, I think, to councillors, but for the benefit of those who may be listening, the Local Government Act says the role of councillors under Part 2 Division 1 is good governance in its district for the benefit and well-being of the community. Part 2 Division 5 says councillors themselves should participate in decision-making, and that decision-making needs to represent the interests of the community in the decision-making. That is a specific role of individual councillors. The local government reforms are now going further with greater role clarity. In relation to responsibilities of councillors, it talks to communicating the decisions and resolutions of council to stakeholders and the public. And also, and this is very specific to the role of the councillor, facilitating public engagement in the local government. It is not wholly the role of the administration to do that facilitation. In fact, what they do is deliver the council's decision about that, but it is councillors' role to positively engage with the community and to provide feedback to the community. I raise these issues now because I feel that there are some directions and change happening in this council, but that tend to be responsive to actions they are seeing outside this council. We have recently engaged with a number of members from this chamber, and that has been largely on our initiative. In fact, it's been solely on our initiative. Any feedback has been welcome, and it has come, but in relation, I would say in relation to this motion, I was not aware of it until I read the agenda paper. As you appreciate, like yourselves, we are volunteers. We have our lives, we have other time, other responsibilities. So I would seek from council the opportunity in the discussion of Councillor Choi's motion that it also considers its current review.
60 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mayor. Its current review of these related policies, and it takes the opportunity to discuss those with members of the public and stakeholders who have a great interest in this area and actually have some expertise to add. It is not just a responsibility that you have to look at the policies, it is a responsibility to make sure that the policies of the district are for the benefit and well-being of the community. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Street? No. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Ms Bronwyn David of South Perth, and she is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 12.1. Welcome, Ms David.
Councillors. Tracy, a friend of mine over there, just spoke to you. Tracy and I, Tracy mentioned a couple of times in her talk to you, the we she was referring to was a group of concerned citizens. She and I are part of the South Perth Tree Canopy Advocates. This has been set up on a city-wide basis, but it's only one of a dozen or so groups across the metropolitan area who are all advocating for the preservation of tree canopies in their area. It is a growing movement. But as Tina Smith, a US Senator, has observed, in politics and in life, timing is everything. So thank you to Councillor Choi for putting this on the agenda. And you probably had no idea it would come before us today on the same day as the State of the Environment report, which has indicated that Australia is, excuse my French, going to hell in a handbasket. Europe's on fire. The east coast of Australia is underwater. We had our hottest summer on record, but I would lay good money that that record won't stand for very long. There is ongoing environmental decline in the country, and that's not just about we shouldn't just be concerned about that for our comfort, like, oh, it's too hot to live sort of thing. Environmental degradation has economic impacts on individuals and businesses and councils. But what can we do? We're just a little council in a very big country. Well, as another famous person once said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And the journey to stabilise and eventually reverse climate change can begin with a single tree. As Tracy said to you, this isn't about being responsive anymore. This is about taking the initiative, showing some leadership, being on the front foot about that. Tree preservation is one of the simplest and easiest ways to preserve the city of South Perth and its livability. And not just its livability, but its economic value as well. One of the first things you can do to take this step is to talk up trees. Tracy said that our community, our Canopy Advocate Group has been given a copy of the Significant Tree Register. Well, the Significant Tree Register should be on the front page of your website. Let's celebrate trees in the area, because trees are a very large part about why people come to live in South Perth. You walk down our streets, you see these avenues of mature trees, and they're beautiful, and that is why people want to be here. Those trees that we see, though, were all planted by people who have come before us. And I say that because once upon a time, this area would not, in fact, have been a forest, but more likely to be scrubby bushland. So if there are tall trees out there, it's because individuals have planted those trees. And the city has planted a lot of those trees as well, which is fabulous, but there is only so much city land on which we can continue to put trees to reach canopy targets, which I know that you are striving towards. But how are we rewarding our forebears who planted these trees? We're allowing them to be cut down at the drop of a hat. It takes decades to grow a tree to a reasonable size, and it takes minutes to tear it down. It never ceases to amaze me, people who buy into this area on the basis of its natural beauty, of the environment, only to raze the home and all of the trees on the block before they start building their dream home. They're more than happy to live in an environment, perhaps receive shade from their neighbour's tree or the street tree, have that nice leafy outlook, but they give us nothing in return. It's not going to be popular amongst the very traditional conservative capitalists amongst us, but trees on private property are not just privately owned. They are a community asset as well. They cool the environment, they assist in maintaining individuals' mental health. Shaded roads deteriorate less quickly than roads in full sunlight. Roads that deteriorate less quickly need less maintenance, saving the city money in the long term. Steps have to be taken now to find ways to save them. So whilst I appreciate the city's position that Councillor Choi's motion can wait a couple of months, work in with something else, I would agree with my colleague that the sooner we get this going, the better. The sooner we start, the sooner we finish. This needs to be done now, not in 8 months' time. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Councillors, do we have any questions for Ms David this evening? Councillor Cridland.
Thank you for your presentation about a very important topic, which is trees and its contribution not only to the amenity of local residents, but more widely. I was wondering if you had a view on whether or not we should have some trees down in the one stark area where we've got none at all down on the foreshore.
Are you handing me a poison chalice, Councillor Cridland?
No, I'm being deadly serious.
Yes, I think if the council has large swathes of land, there should be more trees on them, because they're not just about us, but they're also about wildlife as well. And less trees, less bird life, the less wildlife we have. So if there is spare land, by all means. I agree it has to be balanced with open space, which people enjoy, to throw a frisbee around, run the dogs around, but I've got no problems with it. Of course, I don't live anywhere near where I'm going to get a river view that is likely to be blocked by one, but I just think, you know, people who get upset about that, too bad, you know, and, you know, in fact, if it were me and a tree had been planted and a tree had been taken out, a very, very large billboard would be erected instead with a picture of a tree on it saying, you know, you thought a tree was bad. So, thank you.
Any further questions? So, Ms David, I'll just ask if there's anyone else that wants to ask you a question. Is there anyone else that would like to ask Ms David a question this evening?
I'm here all night, people.
No, looks like you're off the hook. Thanks very much for your deputation. All right, so that brings us to item 10, which is the draft July reports. And I'll now hand you over to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, to take you through the balance of the draft July reports.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.1, proposed third-party digital advertising sign additions to existing commercial building on lot 303, 149 to 153 South Terrace, Como. This report seeks Council's consideration for a recommendation of refusal to the West Australian Planning Commission for third-party digital advertising sign additions to an existing commercial building at 149 to 153 South Terrace, Como. The item is referred to Council as there is no specific delegation afforded to officers to determine the application. It is considered that the proposed development does not achieve compliance with the requirements and objectives of the relevant planning scheme and policy, and would have a significant adverse amenity impact on the residents of the precinct. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that Council advise the West Australian Planning Commission of a recommendation of refusal for the reasons listed in the report.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Reference has been made to the advertising billboards at the corner of Henley and Canning. When I looked at that JDAP, I understand that the advertisements were as part of a larger development which included at least an office space. But it looks as though it's been constructed without that office space. Now, I'm just wondering what's happened there.
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. The application was actually amended and removed the office development, so you have that structure that remains. Okay.
Just another question, if I may. So, just referring to the briefing note here, where it states that it is proposed that 2.5% of the content will be of community benefit. As this goes to the operation of the advertisement, can this form part of the DA decision, or is it independent on such and should be included within the licence agreement?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. So the recommendation is not to support the proposal, and that if council support that recommendation, that would be sent to the WAPC. They would make the decision. If council still wishes to recommend refusal of the proposal, councillors could amend the recommendation to add suggested conditions that could be sent to the WAPC. I couldn't categorically state they would make it onto a decision, but that would be an option available to councillors.
And just a final question, again to the briefing note, where it says that the owner has committed to improving the building, which will directly enhance the visual amenity of the area. Again, can this form part of a DA approval? Because I can't seem to see anything of a concrete nature within the DA.
Ms Mullen.
You see the chair, that wouldn't be included. That's just an offer that the applicant has actually made in addition to the signage, but the application is purely for signage, so that wouldn't be included in that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillors, any further questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Choi, and perhaps if councillors can activate their lights, that's much easier for me to see when I'm scanning the room.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got several questions and I did provide most of those questions on notice to the city before tonight.
I'm seeing a shaking head.
Apologies by the CEO. Okay, well, we'll see how we go then. Question one, what material differences exist both in planning and policy between this proposed third-party digital advertising sign for the corner of South Terrace and Canning Highway and the already approved and functioning third-party digital advertising signs located on the corner of Henley Street and Canning Highway?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. In very basic terms, you're looking at the Canning Bridge Activity Centre area. The other site is located within that area, and this site is not located within an activity centre plan area. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor and Ms Mellon. So I did ask in terms of both planning and policy. So did you want to take the rest of that on notice if there was a more fuller response that could be had out of that before the next meeting? Is that okay?
Ms Mullen.
Through the chair, thank you. The same policies would apply, but obviously you have the additional layer of the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan in relation to the existing signage on Canning Highway. I can take that notice and provide further comment.
My apologies. There were 7 questions Councillor Choi sent through that were only addressed to me. I didn't appreciate they weren't sent through to governance or the rest of the other people. So perhaps we could take all of them on notice and get an answer to you, because it's quite a long length list.
Okay, so did you want me to ask them or leave them till next week?
I imagine if they've been sent through, perhaps I might suggest that maybe a response can be emailed to the questions and the answers can be emailed to all councillors so that all councillors have the benefit of those answers prior to next week.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor. I will leave them until next week then. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on this item tonight? No. If we could move on to the next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.2, consent to advertise modified draft building height and Salter Point escarpment local planning policies. This report recommends that Council endorse modifications to the draft building height local planning policy and draft Salter Point escarpment local planning policy, which were approved to be advertised by Council concurrently with draft local planning scheme number 7, LPS 7, in August of 2021. Draft LPS 7 was approved for advertising by the West Australian Planning Commission on the 31st of May 2022, subject to modifications. The modifications will affect the operation provisions within the draft policies relating to the assessment of building height. Modifications are recommended to the policies prior to advertising to respond to the changes to LPS 7.
Thank you. Councillors, Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this process began in 2018 with the with policy P320 around Salter Point Heights. So just clarifying that what is being presented here, and I appreciate we had a briefing on this a couple of weeks ago, but just to distill this, the implications of what's being proposed is in keeping in the same spirit as what was initially proposed in 2018 under P320.
Now, is that Ms Lummer or Ms Burback? Oh, Mr Gibbons.
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through the Chair. As was explained at the briefing which we had earlier in the month, the intent is the same and the result is the same. It's just a slightly different way to measure it because we were not able to transfer the same controls directly across due to changes in the regulations and deemed provisions.
Thank you, Mr Gibbons. Councillors, any further questions on this item? Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to confirm, it does allow 2 different methodologies in the actual
building development. So one is more flatline and one could be the staggered tiered approach. Yep.
Mr Giddens?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.1, the listing of payments for June 2022. This report presents the council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between the 1st and 30th of June 2022 for information.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions. In relation to a listing of payment on page 129 of the attachments to Blue Force for a monthly resident monitoring of $2,416.13. Just curious as to what that is, please.
Mr Adams, did I send that your way, or Mr Lecoq? Mr Lecoq.
Through the chair, that will be for Collier Park Village, alarm monitoring, personal security for the residents living there. Actually, more to do with health than anything else.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Choi.
Sorry, Mr Mayor. Yes, thank you. Just my second question was in relation to just wondering whether the city looks at cheaper and more economical options for the ratepayers when purchasing. Just looking at entries such as library supplies from Dymocks and things like that. You know, there are alternatives online that I think may be a bit cheaper. I'm just wondering, just curious again as to how the city goes about such purchases.
Mr Adams.
So our procurement policies aim to achieve the best value for money outcomes. But as well as that, we need to have certain suppliers on our system, because using a different supplier every time you buy something comes with its own cost, because you have to set them up. So you have to pay staff to set them up in the system and all of those sort of things. So it's not just about trying to find the one-off cheaper item somewhere, because that can result in a false economy, really. So we do try. Our policies are all aimed at getting value for money, but we try and do that on some sort of scale rather than looking at an individual purchase.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillor Choi, did you have any others?
No, thank you. That was it, Mr Mayor.
All right. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements for June 2022 interim. The monthly financial statements are provided within the attachments A through I, with a high-level analysis contained in the comments of the report.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a very pleasing interim result, $3 million favourable variance in the operating result, operating outcome. Could you confirm if the adjustment for employee entitlement benefits has been updated in this number at all?
Mr Lecoq.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. We have updated employee entitlements, although it is provisional. It was done in a rush to finalise month-end reporting, but yes, we have put through an entry.
Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you very much. And that provisional update for employee entitlements, does that include the actuarial valuation on the leave entitlements?
Mr Lecoq.
Yes, that's correct. So the same assumptions was used in the modelling to update those entitlements on the information available at that point in time. But yeah, I do need to stress we still have to spend some time on making sure that it has all the veracity that we want for in it in order to be financial year in final figures.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And just with regard to the end of year outturn, so these are interim numbers. Are there any areas within the city that we're expecting a lot of additional costs to come in late that would actually result in the $3 million operating surplus to reduce?
Mr Lecoq.
So just to clarify, we don't have a $3 million operating surplus. It's just a positive $3 million better than the deficit that we anticipated. So we still have a deficit of $406,000. We're still going through the process of finalising the entries for the financial year end. And again, we're still looking for costs that officers might have missed in terms of accrual. So it's quite a tedious process to go through that in its entirety. And yes, I do anticipate picking up further costs. It's very difficult to quantify it at this point in time.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you for that, Mr. Locklock. Yeah, I agree. It's actually not a surplus, but a favourable outcome, 3.09 million. With regard to the capital expenditure, year to date, we've only spent 9.5 million against the budget of 12.5, so $3 million favourable underspend, 24%. Are there any projects where we've got significant items of capital that still need to be accounted for in 21-22?
Mr. Lecoq.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct, Councillor Brandis. There's quite a few projects that even today I identified some items that still require accrual and that will come through. But yes, there will also be some carry forwards, as previously highlighted. So there's a bit of a mixed bag of both carry forwards as well as some items that needs to be finalised and some final costings put to book.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And with regard to the additional capital expenditure to be incurred for 21-22 and also the carry forwards, do we have an indication as to how much for each of those that we have at this point in time?
Mr. Lecoq.
A bit too early to give definitive figures. I would say carry forward, rough estimate, I reckon north of $1 million. Further accruals, I did a quick calculation. I am aware of approximately, at this stage, a figure just over $600,000. But I must stress, it's early days. There's some people in the engineering team that are still talking to contractors who haven't even rendered invoices yet.
Thank you, Mr. Lecoq.
Thank you both. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.4.3, City of South Perth Penalty Units Amendment, Local Law 2022. This report considers the current provisions and recommends changes to the City of South Perth Penalty Units Local Law 2003, which prescribes the value of a penalty unit used in conjunction with the modified penalties expressed in the City of South Perth local laws. The penalty unit determines the value of an infringement.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? No. In that case, that winds up item 10. We move on to item 12, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. There's only one. It's item 12.1. It's a notice of motion by Councillor Mary Choi entitled Protection and Maintenance of Trees During Development. Councillors, does anyone have any questions for the officers on this item? Councillor Russell.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, both motions have the wording additional incentives for tree retention. Because the word additional is used, could the city clarify what the current incentives are to retain trees?
Mr. Giddens, can I send that one your way?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I just sidebar with my colleague. Through the chair, Councillor Russell, the city currently does not have any incentives to retain the trees. The way the language is written is, as per Councillor Choi's, to introduce new mechanisms as such, and so hence by doing the research on this particular item, we would then be able to see what other incentives other local authorities are using, because at the moment we don't have any.
Okay, so the wording should be new incentives. Do we have any idea what incentives we would be looking at? Any idea?
I wouldn't hazard a guess at this point in time. That's the whole point of the research exercise. One of the other elements as well is through the advertising with the Local Planning Scheme 7. We plan to be asking a question in relation to this of our broader community, so we'd be interested to see what would sit as palatable with them. It's a very broad question, and we certainly don't want to back them into a corner, but we hope to get some of that information, and hence that is why we're wanting to hold reporting back to you on this particular item until we've had that, undertaken that piece of consultation with the broader community, the whole city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further? Councillor Saladin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question on the timing of the draft LPS 7 to the administration. Currently, when is it likely that the draft LPS 7 will be reported back to council after public advertising?
Mr. Giddens.
Yes, thank you very much through the chair. Thanks, Councillor Saladin. The report indicates February. However, due to delays in putting together the whole range of information sheets and mapping and undertaking some of this policy work as well, it will be pushed back through to March next year, where we're planning on advertising the new scheme between August and November this year, which will then allow a short 2.5 month period in order to turn around all of the submissions. Now, if the submissions are excessive, that March date may be pushed back one further month, but we'll keep council up to date with that through bulletin items as we get closer to the date. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on this item? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just coming back to Mrs. David's deputation where she was talking about the significant tree register and not being available on the website. Is there any impediment for that not to be on the website?
Normally I'd send that to Mr. Taylor. Mr. Atwell, will you help us there?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Russell, for the question. So we do have a draft of a digital version of the significant tree register. The marketing people have been working on it for some time. It does need a final edit to make sure all the information is accurate and correct, particularly with relation to the significant trees on private property. So we'd hope that probably within about another 8 weeks, we could potentially have it on the website.
Thank you, Mr. Atwell. Mr. Bradford?
I'd also add that significant trees are shown on our Intramaps site as well, so they are able to be found.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? No. In that case, ordinarily we'd move to item 15, but that's only necessary if we have any reason to close the meeting to the public, which we don't. So that brings us to item 16, which is closure. So before I close the meeting, thank you all for your attendance and participation this evening. I declare the meeting closed at 3 minutes past 7 p.m. Thank you all and good night.